Ann Conway was reputed to be the most learned of the female metaphysical writers of England, but she endured a terrific recurrent cephalalgia which lasted from her adolescence to her death. Although she was waited upon by a most imposing array of medical attendants and consultants, her headache remained undiagnosed and unrelieved. And amongst the great and the good from both England and France who attempted to cure Conway of her burden was William Harvey, the physician who established the human circulatory system. Born in 1831, Conway was the wife of Lord Conway, the Secretary of State to King Charles II. She was described as small, finely boned, well-formed, of wiry and nervous type, vivacious, and of very high mental attainment. And while she could study and write with occasional tremendous bursts of energy, this was only possible when she was not suffering from her frequent and prostrating attacks of hemicrania. Hello, I'm Ibrahim Imam, and welcome to this episode of the Neurology Lounge podcast. In this episode, we will take an excursion into migraine, the most common debilitating neurological disorder. And we'll take off with the story of Conway, who is one of several celebrated historical figures who are reported to have been victims of this disease. And in her case, her fame came partly from being managed by two prominent physicians of the time. Apart from William Harvey, she was also once the patient of Thomas Willis, the acknowledged father of neurology. Willis got involved with Conway soon after he published his famous book, The Anatomy of the Brain. And luckily for posterity and for historians, he kept copious notes of his consultations with Ann Conway. He wrote that some years since I was sent for to visit a most noble lady, for about 20 years sick with almost a continual headache, at first intermitting. She was of a most beautiful form and great wit, so that she was skilled in the liberal arts and in all sorts of literature beyond the condition of her sex. He continued, and as if it were thought too much by nature for her to enjoy so great endowments, without some detriment, she was extremely punished with this disease. Willis went on to say, this sickness being limited to no one place of her head, troubled her sometimes on one side, sometimes on the other, and often through the whole compass of the head. And during the fit, which rarely ended under a day and a night space, and often held for 2, 3, or 4 days, she was impatient of light, speaking, noise, or of any motion. Sitting upright in the bed, the chamber made dark, she would talk to nobody, nor take any sleep or sustenance. He added that at length, about the declination of the fit, she was wont to lie down with an heavy and disturbed sleep, from which awakening she found herself better, and so by degrees grew better and continued indifferently well till the time of the intermission. In characterizing the pattern of the headaches, Willis wrote that formerly the fits came not but occasionally, and seldom under 20 days or a month, but afterwards they came more often, and lately she was seldom free. Willis's description vividly conveys the key factors that define migraine: its debility, its heightened sensitivity to such factors as noise and light, and the prolonged nature of each attack. By definition, each one lasts 4 to 72 hours. Willis also captures the tendency of migraine to remit and recur, and to often be lifelong. Conway's headaches worsened in her 20s when she started experiencing nausea and vomiting, another characteristic of migraine. The above portrayal of Willis and Conway comes from the biography of Willis titled Soul Made Flesh, written by Carl Zimmer. Luckily, we do not have to go all the way back in history to understand how migraine tortures its victims throughout their lives. This is because many contemporary people have documented their lifetime journey with migraine. Take, for example, the migraine account of Monica Nelson titled Mere Sense. In it, Nelson wrote that her migraine started as dull headaches when she was still in high school. She said, "They would start in the afternoon, worsen as I spent time in the sun, and only be relieved by the night's sleep." She added that the headaches were intermittent at first, but by the end of summer, she could fully expect them to appear every afternoon. And when they did, they exploded into pain so deep, she said, I would retreat to my bedroom for a nap. Nelson's headaches continued even when she started work, employed in a hospital records department. She said by then the headaches had grown more intense and more frequent and had become a constant companion. And this was also around the time her migraines demonstrated one of its characteristic qualities, a notorious tendency to transform. While studying as part of night classes she was taking, the background headache she was experiencing, she said, completely shifted to the side, became pounding, and over the following 90 minutes grew in intensity. She likened the new pain to the slow and methodical churning of a hand drill into the wood, which writhed its way deeper into my head. At each dismal thump, she went on, the pain sent spurts of pain into my awareness, and each little movement intensified it. Furthermore, the pain was accompanied by roiling waves of nausea and vomiting. With a particularly bad episode, she said I retched and groaned my way through it, lying in darkness and wishing for a way to sleep through it. After these horrendous spells, she said she was both physically and emotionally drained. Hunger was a prominent trigger for Nelson's headaches. But this is not the only agent provocateur that can bring on a migraine attack. Amongst the other incendiary migraine rabble-rousers are physical exertion, insufficient sleep, stress, menses, and dietary factors such as alcohol, chocolate, sugar, cheese, red wine, and seasonings. Migraine attacks may also be provoked by environmental factors such as reflected sunlight, perfumes, odors, smoke, heat, and even changes in the weather. Apart from its tendency to come along with non-pain symptoms and to be triggered, there are many other characteristic features that distinguish migraine from other headaches. For example, before the attack, there may be a prodrome of fatigue, neck stiffness, mood changes, impaired concentration, yawning, and even food craving. And an interesting prodrome that Nelson experienced was a perceptively bad mouth odor that she said consistently predicted the coming of her migraine attack, a feature that made her realize that the migraines were no longer a singular part of me. They were a part of the whole of me. And although not well recognized, migraine attacks may be accompanied by what are called cranial autonomic symptoms, and these include nasal congestion and tearing, as well as a fullness in the ears. These are features that can make it difficult to distinguish migraine from the so-called cranial autonomic cephalalgias, such as cluster headache. Migraine headaches are also frequently accompanied by neck pain and skin tenderness. And rarely, migraine may present with nose bleeding, called epistaxis, with hiccups, low body temperature, laughter, this is called gelastic migraine, and, wait for it, a red dot on the forehead. All these characteristics go to show how much migraine is more than just a headache. And this is a point that was made most strenuously by the famous neurologist Oliver Sacks in his book simply titled Migraine. Yes, Oliver Sacks wrote many other books apart from The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Sacks regretted that almost all early depictions of migraine dwelt on the physical aspects of migraine attacks while neglecting their emotional components. He explained that as I saw more patients, it became apparent to me that headache was never the sole feature of migraine, and later still that it was not even a necessary feature of all migraines. Sacks went on to stress that many migraine attacks were drenched in emotional significance and could not be usefully considered, let alone treated, unless their emotional antecedents and effects were exposed in detail. Someone who has explored the non-physical dimensions of migraine is Abby Reed in her migraine memoir titled The Color of Pain. Reed acknowledges that head pain was the most disabling part of her migraine, but she also highlighted the other equally disabling non-pain features of the disease she experiences, remarking that just because I focus on head pain doesn't mean the rest of my body isn't experiencing some symptom. Reed traced the onset of her migraine to early childhood, starting even before her kindergarten years. She said it was as though I came out of the womb with a migraine. Her migraines have stayed with her since then and have become so much a regular part of my life by now that my routine is instinctive. She describes her migraine as a head pain that hits like a rubber mallet, at first soft yet firm, then building until the mallet transforms into a jackhammer. Sharp and unrelenting, everything around me blurs. The picture that Reed paints of her migraine is that of a full-body neurologic disease, and she referred in this regard to her experience of light and smell sensitivity, nausea, tingling in the body, ringing in the ears, and a brain fog that she said creeps into my other tasks such that what should take 15 minutes takes me an entire hour. Reed also documented two less recognized dimensions of migraine: shame and embarrassment. For example, she wrote of the shame of how it affects my life and the embarrassment of being unable to remember people's faces and names, even those who she said I've known for years. Amongst the many other spheres of embarrassment Reed explored are the embarrassment of having to stand and pace to get through a church service, of being unable to hold a normal job, and of the inability to keep up with friendships that shrank her social circle down to a measly puddle. A notable feature of migraine we have not discussed so far is the aura. The aura is a transient symptom that usually heralds the beginning of a migraine bout. For many people, the aura is what they understand to be definitive of a migraine headache. The aura is, however, only present in about a third of people with migraine, and these are the ones that are classified as having classic migraine with aura. Other migraine sufferers must accept the less fancy category of common migraine or migraine without aura. The aura typically comes before the headache, but it may come with or even after the headache. Or it may occur on its own without any accompanying headache whatsoever. The classical migraine aura is visual, and this tends to start centrally and gradually expands outwards. The visual aura can also be seen with the eyes shut, and it characteristically lasts between 5 to 60 minutes from onset to full resolution. Visual auras typically manifest as blind spots with jagged edges or colors called scintillating scotomas. But they may also be blind spots without jagged edges or colors. They can be black and white lines, They can be flashes called photopsias, and they can be distortions called metamorphopsias. Yeah, we like our migraine terms. A graphic depiction of the migraine aura is documented by Abby Reed. She wrote that her aura is usually a single C-shaped kaleidoscope of flickering metallic colors that grows out and marches across her field of vision. But sometimes, she said, it is a single line that rims the exterior of my vision and then grows inward until it vanishes. Although the most frequent type of migraine aura is visual, it is important to point out that it can also manifest as speech impairments or as other sensory or motor phenomena. Beyond the two main types of migraine, with and without aura, the disorder can also masquerade as one of a countless assortment of variants, such as retinal migraine, ophthalmoplegic migraine, and vestibular migraine. And amongst the most unusual migraine variants is the Alice in Wonderland syndrome. This is a condition that manifests with such a mind-boggling list of visual distortions, which include macropsia, this is objects or people appearing bigger, micropsia, objects or people appearing smaller, macrosomatogonosia, a body part appearing to be getting bigger, microsomatogonosia, a body part appears to be getting smaller, telopsia, which is objects or people appearing further away, and pilopsia, objects or people appearing nearer. This is perhaps an appropriate time to take a step back and ask, what is the cause of this ubiquitous phenomenon called migraine? And the simple answer to this is nobody knows. But that is not to say that we are lacking in possible risk factors. Indeed, there's a long list of non-modifiable migraine risk factors, which includes Caucasian ethnicity, a family history of migraine, early puberty, and a long list of mutations such as the ones affecting the CACNA1 and the Notch3 genes. This is for the specialist. And there's also a similarly long list of modifiable migraine risk factors, which include lower socioeconomic status, obesity, underweight, hot climates, high altitudes, domestic violence, and metabolic factors such as low sodium, high calcium, and vitamin D deficiency. So pick your migraine risk factors carefully. And just as we are not wanting in risk factors, we are not short of possible migraine mechanisms. On the contrary, there is a surfeit of those, from trigeminovascular pathway inhibition and cortical spreading depression to glymphatic dysfunction, and the latest kid on the block, overactivity in the calcitonin gene receptor peptide pathway. That's the CGRP pathway. And this is also perhaps the right time to venture into the treatments of migraine because, as we shall see, our understanding of the CGRP pathway has unraveled a revolution in migraine therapeutics. Research has shown that CGRP is released during migraine attacks, and administering CGRP can trigger migraine attacks. It is therefore not surprising that many migraine treatments work by restraining CGRP. CGRP is a villain. But let us first go back in time to see how our practice of alleviating migraine has evolved over time. And there's no better guide for this than Catherine Foxhall, who comprehensively explored the medieval ideas and treatments of the disorder in her book titled Migraine, A History. Foxhall takes us back to the 15th to 17th centuries when she said there was a rich culture of medical approaches to migraine. And these included such remedies as bloodletting, earthworms, nutmeg, feverfew, purging, heating, cooling, gargles, sneezing, and herbs such as rosemary. In her research into nearly 100 separate recipes, Foxhall also discovered such shiver-inducing interventions as roasted harebrain and the gall of an ass. This pharmacopoeia may explain why many people with migraine kept away from the recipes, and took succor in simpler approaches. Take the case of the English Enlightenment poet Alexander Pope as an example. Pope was described by Andrew Levy in his book A Brain Wider Than the Sky as a small man with a curved spine who nevertheless commanded the English language with such supreme self-confidence that his physical limits became signs of strength. But as great as he was in the day, his nights were humbled by fierce migraines. And to relieve his headaches, Levy said Pope placed his head over a hot cup of coffee and surrounded his head with caffeinated steam. Clever. And to ensure a constant relief, Pope kept a serving woman awake many nights, bringing him these brews. And things were not particularly better in the 19th century, and Foxhall illustrated this most potently with the example of Annie, a 32-year-old woman who was admitted to Queen Square in 1899 under the famous neurologist William Gowers. Foxhall wrote that Annie received an astonishing array of pharmacological substances and experimental treatments during her stay in Queen Square. Indeed, she said, Gowers treated her with at least 17 different agents, illustrating the therapeutic lengths physicians went to, and perhaps still do, in trying to treat their patients with migraine. Amongst the agents Annie endured were tonics, quinine, antipyrine, phenacetin, bromides, chloralose, phosphoric acid, strychnine, trinitrine, galsimium, brandy, migraine, morphine, and cannabis, at the end of which Foxhall said Annie became mentally affected. This then brings us to the state of contemporary migraine treatments. Most guidelines today classify the treatment of migraine into those that work acutely and those that work preventatively. And among the first-line acute treatments are simple analgesics such as aspirin, diclofenac, and ibuprofen. Because of the frequent accompanying nausea, acute migraine treatments are also often used together with antisickness medications such as domperidone as well as metoclopramide. When simple analgesics fail to abort a migraine attack, the most effective acute treatments neurologists resort to are the triptans. And neurologists are lucky to have a wide range of triptans to pick from. Sumatriptan, rizatriptan, zolmitriptan, naratriptan, you get the gist. Each has selective advantages and disadvantages, and often with a wide variety of routes of administration. It is perhaps no surprise to learn that triptans probably work indirectly by suppressing the villain, the CGRP system. Indeed, research has shown that triptans, when effective, normalize the levels of CGRP in the body. The knowledge of the role of CGRP in generating migraine has also opened a completely new vista in the treatment of migraine. Specifically, it has led to the emergence of molecules that act on the CGRP receptor, and these are called CGRP receptor antagonists. These are agents that are used mainly for the acute treatment of migraine, but some are also used in migraine prevention. The main CGRP receptor antagonists are ubrogepant, rimegepant, atogepant, and zavegepant, the pants or G-pants. These are usually considered when triptans are ineffective. It is all well and good to have a treatment that aborts acute headaches, but it will be futile if the acute headaches are occurring regularly. And this is why the drug treatment of migraine has a large preventative arm. And amongst the almost countless migraine preventative treatments are amitriptyline, beta blockers such as propranolol, anti-seizure medications such as valproate and topiramate, and blood pressure medications such as candesartan. And just as the knowledge of the role of CGRP in migraine has influenced the acute treatment of the disease, it has also revolutionized the approach to its prevention. The result is the development of monoclonal antibodies that target and neutralize the CGRP molecule itself. These so-called CGRP mAbs, or monoclonal antibodies, consist of erenumab, framanezumab, galcanezumab, and eptinezumab, and they are administered as monthly subcutaneous injections or injections under the skin. The CGRP mAbs are usually, but not always, considered when at least 2 other preventative drugs have failed. There are also non-drug preventative approaches to migraine, which include botulinum toxin, nerve blocks, and nerve stimulations. And beyond these are the equally important non-interventional therapies such as exercise, Tai Chi, yoga, dietary control of triggers, biofeedback, and even cognitive behavior therapy. In the next episode of the podcast, I'll be exploring the patient perspective of migraine with Danielle Newport Fancher, author of the book titled 10, A Memoir of Migraine Survival. Following this, I will explore the treatments of migraine with neurologist Mark Wetherall, author of the book titled Living with Migraine. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this podcast in which we explored migraine. Apart from the books I have already cited, I've also relied on the following source for this podcast. This is by Owen, titled The Famous Case of Lady Ann Conway, published in the Annals of Medical History in 1937. If you found this podcast enlightening, educational, or helpful, you might also find my book Surfing the Brain similarly entertaining and enlightening. And for more academic dimensions of migraine, you might consider checking NeuroChecklist, my online neurology database. And to make sure you do not miss the next episode of the podcast, why not subscribe to the iTunes, the Spotify, or YouTube channels of the podcast? Until then, thank you very much for your time.